If a nation rejects the call of God to return, and if the harbingers aren't heeded, then comes a second stage. So we move now to the second stage, within which are contained four mysteries. Four mysteries. Do you see this? He asked, as he pointed to the image on the seal, to what looked like a shadow around the scroll, a shadowy double image. It was faint, and nothing that would have struck me or anyone as noteworthy. Is significant? I asked. It's a double image. A second image? A second image as in there comes a second? I asked. As in there comes a second? Yes. So what would it mean? The prophecy has the second part. It leads to something else, to second manifestation. The Eisenstein effect, which is what this, the attempt of a nation to defy the course of its judgment apart from repentance, will instead set in motion a chain of events to bring about the very calamity it sought to avert. And this all has to do with America? I asked. 7 years after 9/11, he said, the American economy collapsed, triggering a global economic implosion. Behind it all, all that followed was something much deeper than economics. Behind the collapse of Wall Street and American economy was Eisenstein. How? The explanation for an economic collapse are endless, he said. No one factor stands alone, and one can go back in time as far as one chooses to search for causes. But according to the Eisenstein effect, the second calamity must be effectively born out of the first, and out of the nation's response to the first calamity. So that the collapse of economy and Wall Street would be to somehow go back to 911. And it all does go back to 911. He said. The smoke was still hovering over Ground Zero when the ancient vow of defiance was proclaimed from Capitol Hill. In the days and years that followed, the nation would attempt to fulfill that vow. The rebuilding was never just about Ground Zero, but about rebuilding the entire nation. Remember what was proclaimed over the hornstone. It will forever remain a symbolic cornerstone for the rebuilding of New York and the nation. And when the ancient vow was proclaimed in its entirety, it happened in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. In both cases, it clearly had to do with more than Ground Zero and New York. It was about America as a nation, and it would be the nation as the whole that carried out the vow. Just as it happened in ancient Israel, it would happen in post 911. America, the vow would be turned into reality as in I-10 would become the nation's foreign and domestic policy. How so? What did "we will rebuild" mean? The ancient Israel, he asked. It meant they would repair the damage and rebuild their fallen buildings, towers, homes, and their walls, he added. They would rebuild their walls and fortify their defenses so as to become invulnerable to future attacks. In the same way, America after 9/11 would embark on a campaign to rebuild its walls of protection, to strengthen and fortify its systems of defense. The campaign would mean the establishing of the Department of Homeland Security, the launching of a global war against terror, and two conventional wars abroad, and one in Afghanistan and the other in Iraq. It was all a reaction to 9/11. America was doing exactly as ancient Israel had done in 1910, attempting to defy the first calamity. In fact, the speech that would launch the nation's war on terror would contain the words, "We will rebuild America," was waging war against 911, trying to reverse its consequences, overcome its impact, and nullify its danger. So in the years following the attack, America's foreign and domestic policy was in fact a translation of ancient vow. But was it wrong? I asked. What choice was there? Is it wrong for a gardener to cut off the stem of a weed? He asked. Instead of dealing with its root, The issue is deeper. You can't solve a spiritual problem with a military or political solution. Apart from a return to God, the root issue remains untouched and will manifest again in a different form. It's in this that the Isaiah 10 effect begins to operate. A nation's attempt at defying judgment, apart from repentance, ends up setting in motion a future calamity. In its campaign to strengthen itself, it ends up bringing about its own weakening. So then, as America vowed to emerge stronger than before and wage war against 911, the Isaiah 10 effect was set in motion. Yes, and its campaign born of that defiance would end up producing a backlash. How so? I asked. The campaign to strengthen America's national security and defenses would require massive expenditures. The war on terror, the military campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq would add multiply billions of dollars to the federal budget. Funds and resources that otherwise would have been used to strengthen the American economy were now diverted and drained away from investment. The war in Iraq would impel a surging of oil prices, further draining the nation's gross domestic product. The massive amount of governmental spending in support of the nation's war on terror would lead to skyrocketing of the national debt, further draining its economy, and beyond the financial consequences what America began in the wake of 911 would end up further dividing the nation, and it all would lead up to the economic collapse, in part, he said, and for all that he would be yet another manifestation of the Isaiah 10 effect that would bring about the collapse of the American and global economy. And this too was born out of the ruins of 9/11. The most critical effect of the calamity on the American and global economy would begin 6 days after the attack. As a response to the calamity, yes, he said, as in the ancient war in January 2001, with the American economy beginning to slow down, the Federal Reserve began reducing the target interest rate, lowering it to 3.5% by the summer of that year. Then came 911. The first economic impact of the attack was the closing down of the New York Stock Exchange the same day. The market would remain closed for 6 days. When it reopened the following Monday, it would suffer the largest point crash in Wall Street history up to that day. Up to that time, the attack had inflicted a damaging blow to the already fragile economy. In the days and months after September 11, there was a prevailing fear that the calamity would cause the economy to hemorrhage. The repercussion of 911 and of the nation's response to it would continue to affect the economy long after those initial fears had vanished, along with the ruins of Ground Zero, long after even what appeared to be an economic rebound. September 11 would not only continue to affect the American economy, but to also tie it and in so doing change the global economy. So what happened 6 days after the attack?